Today we are going to talk about patterns, more specifically scaling down patterns that already exist to incorporate them into your croquis. And so for this demonstration, I am going to grab a little shell number. It's a little silk scarf. It's super cute. It's bright red, so it'll jolt you awake. And I'm going to show you guys how you can take a pattern from a real fabric, a real textile, and scale it down so that you can render this pattern in your croquis and make it look not wonky, make it look realistic. Step uno, what you're going to do is you're going to find a square in your pattern. So patterns are basically just a square of print that can be reflected or are repeated in some way to create a, you guessed it, pattern. Woo, okay. So there are a million and three different ways to view patterns because we all see them differently. So what you're going to do first is you're just going to make a mental box in your noggin of where the pattern repeats. So for me, I see a square that kind of goes through this shell and then up around both these shells and then crosses through that middle circular shell again, the spiral shell. I could cut it down even further down the middle vertically to create two parts that reflect, but for me it's easier to see it as that whole. So now what we're going to do is we are going to use our palm because it's approximately a square to scale this pattern to figure out how many palms fit into this square. So what I do is I just put it down on that imaginary box that we've just made and figure out how many palms it takes to fill up that box. And this is so that we can scale it down later and it will fit with the croquis hand. So just stick with me. So this is one palm, two palms to fill up this bottom portion right here. And then we still need to fill up to the top shell. So that would be about half of a palm each right there. So then what you're going to do from here is you're just going to draw out some little squares. You're going to make a sketch so it doesn't matter what size these boxes are. And you're going to make two little boxes. These are two palms, two full palms, and then two half palms. I know this sounds super confusing, but just stick with me and you'll figure it out. You will understand where I'm going with this. So now that you've got those boxes filled in, what you're going to do now is if you've ever worked with a grid before, you know exactly what I'm doing. You're just going to draw the same thing that is in those boxes. So I usually start from the bottom and work my way up, or I start on a line and work my way inward. It depends on what your preference is, but I just like to sketch in these little shapes that kind of represent the objects that I'm filling in. I usually draw mine actually a little bit bigger because I usually fill in my background color first and then fill in the shapes. And when I fill in my background color first, sometimes I go over that line a little bit. So I want to give myself just a little bit extra room. And I don't really throw in any details because that's something that I'll do when I use my markers, and I'm going to erase these lines anyways. So I think it's more important just to lay in the shapes. But also my boxes scooted a little bit because I pulled my fabric downwards. So those last few shapes look like they're off center, but they are really where they need to be. And then once you have this figured out, you can go in and you can shade it. You can do a little practice round. That's usually what I do before I throw it on my croquis. So to scale this down to croquis size, what you're going to do after you've drawn your croquis, you are going to look at the palm that you have made, that you've drawn out, and you are going to make the same set of boxes that correlates with the croquis hand. And so by that, I mean you're going to look at that little palm that you drew, and then you're going to make boxes that size. And that's going to be your new grid for your pattern. And then you'll just repeat that over and over again for the rest of your pattern, or until you kind of like get an idea of how big these shapes are. And then you don't really need to grid out the whole thing, but just until you get an idea of how big you want it to be. So I'm drawing the 4 little boxes, 2 boxes, 2 half boxes, and then we are going to throw those objects into this box, creating that pattern. You got that? That's a lot. So these objects, we're just basically going to do the same thing. Then you're just going to make them smaller scale, because that's how grids work, and what a beautiful thing they are, really. They're going to help you out so much. And so all you're doing is you're just replicating these little shapes into your boxes, and then once you get that done, you can kind of pick out your colors and your detail. Your level of detail will change. You don't need to throw in every single little highlight and shadow from your shell into these boxes or when you actually color your pattern, but you want to just get it so that it's the same idea, so it reads as this fabric. If you are questioning how much detail you should put into it, take a look at your pattern and like maybe put it like 10 feet away from you, or like 5 feet away from you, and just kind of look at it and maybe even squint, see what main color groups come up, and then pick out those markers for your pattern. And then you can throw in a little bit more detail of shape if you want. But I mean, if you're gonna erase these lines again, if you're comfortable with the pattern that you created, you can just kind of lay in those objects and then go from there. So just as a final little recap, because we actually zoomed through this, what you're going to do is you're going to pick out your pattern, your fabric first of all, and then you're going to make that mental square about where the pattern repeats. So figure out what mental square works best for you, which one you can see the best, and then you're going to use your own palms to figure out how big this pattern is in real life, so that you can scale it down later to that croquis size palm. And if you want, you can make a sketch a little bit bigger like I did to kind of lay in those objects to kind of get a feel for the pattern. And then if you want to take it from there down to the croquis, then you can do that too. And then from there you'll just color it in, which is all dependent on what fabric you choose. So that's really all I have for you. Go pick yourself a pattern, do some sketches, have fun. We'll reconvene.